Hey everyone, I'm Noctis Corvus, but you can call me Noctis. This week we're looking at a drawing that was actually completed about last month, and that is if memory serves me well. You see, the other month I decided to do a sort of 30-day sketching challenge, the video of which is up on the channel already. And this is a sketch done from one of the earlier prompts of that process that I kind of completed during the month of the challenge. And I only recorded it because I thought it would be fun to. From there, though, it's kind of just been sitting, and I have had the footage waiting for me to do something with it since I made it. But I got busy, so it was often set aside for later, or in favour of something else, and I just kind of ended up looking over it the more that I got distracted. This week, I realised the folder was there, and that I have been meaning to fully address the drawing, as I do really like it and I found it really fun. And it was really fun to just develop and work on it. So without further delay, let's just look at the drawing at hand then, shall we? Now then, I have slightly already touched on how this began. It was the 30-day art challenge, and my prompt of the day, around day 3, had been the theme of dusk. Yet I wasn't sure what I would be doing to properly address this prompt, when it could have been a wide range of things. It could be a focus on an outcome, a sunset if I wanted to do that, or it could just simply be the time of day that the drawing is set at and the lighting that I use. Now, I had been doodling and sketching before I came upon this idea of a drawing with the lighting of dusk, and it was kind of the idea that I preferred out of all of them. I'd already done drawings for the rest of them, and this just kind of made sense, and what I was more excited for. I could, in theory, have then drawn anything for dusk with this approach. I just needed the light to be the important thread back to the starting word, and I was very aware of this when I was deciding the topic to draw for it. Yet I also got this really strong idea featuring a character of mine that does tie into other things that I do as well, so it made it all more exciting for me. And let's go on that tangent there for a moment. You see, I am quite a fan of writing and drawing. I don't think this is really new news to anybody who's been around here for a moment, but either way. I love to be able to combine these two forms creatively as well, in a way that kind of introduces me to new skills at the same time. So with this said, I have been working a lot on a project in the background as of late and in the last few months. Originally, it began under the name of Noctovia, and I had shared parts of it on here on this channel before, and that was kind of just before I came to realise how big the scale of the project is actually going to be. I thought it would be something that I could combine between these art videos and have it be no issues as I enjoyed it, but I also want it to have its own space to kind of breathe and to grow. The project is already expanding beyond what I originally planned, and it does need to have its own place where I can share it all in one, uninterrupted, and where I can organise it much better as I share it. So that has happened, and there has also been a name change, since I have more space to work with it as well in this capacity. That's all kind of to the side though in background context, I'm not going to say too much on that at the moment. The character though is part of that world, but they're also kind of one who has pre-existed it by quite a bit. By this, I really mean that the story that she has is something that fits really well into this new world, and it is closer to what I want their story to be when I think about everything in perspective. But the first version of them is actually quite a few years older, and it actually started as a challenge between me and a friend before I ever knew that I would be sharing things like this and how I do now. So, whilst the world takes a more complicated shape, I am still fairly aware of her and what I want from her design or personality. It then helps as it kind of let me fit quite a few things into place within her region and the era. But that is all, again, by the side of the drawing. It's all only really relevant because when I had the idea to draw anything set at dusk, I remembered a very key scene of hers that is kind of in the works and maybe a little bit up for debate, but it's also one of the core scenes that made the entire story come to mind to begin with, so it's in a bit of a weird grey area at the moment. But in the scene, she's talking to another character, who at the moment is like a love interest slash joint lead. It's like a dual perspective thing, but they're speaking in front of a portrait in the hallway. It's later in the plot, the stakes aren't the highest, but they're getting to a boiling point and things will soon shift. So it is quite a key scene. It's a moment where people kind of need to decide where they stand and what side they're truly on, which is part of the conversation that these two share. It all happens in front of a portrait of that character's mother. She is alive and well, I feel the need to clarify. She's another present in the story, but she's also subject of her own narrative and her own set of stories that are forming around her. Her reputation is one of strength, and something that this character especially looks up to, and tries quite hard to replicate herself, as she is already aware that they look a lot alike. And that is something I did semi on purpose that I don't really want to mention too much here, but will be relevant quite a bit later. This, though, is a moment that I like quite a lot, as it is a really key point for their development and a turning point for what happens next. So, when I could draw something and anything set at dusk for the 30-day challenge, I kind of knew that it had to be this moment. So, that tangent really is the main reason that I wanted to explore this. It's a moment that I love, one I know before the rest of the story that sort of sets the tone for everyone involved, and kind of decides how the later parts will actually play out. There is a point of no return, where loyalties can no longer remain on the fence or uncertain, and people either have to decide to confront something about themselves, or kind of change sides and decide where they actually stand and what is actually most important to them. People have to make the choice in conversation, and then they have to stick to that route, as both would have irreversible consequences on the characters' lives, and kind of their area of the world as a whole. In other words, it stands out, and I really wanted a visual of this moment since I had the perfect excuse to make it. Otherwise, I usually find that I have these moments that I never get to draw, no matter how much I want to, since they're kind of pushed down the queue until moments change far too much and the idea as a whole needs reworking. This was kind of a perfect moment to just do it without worrying, and kind of without having to focus on the other projects that I've got at hand at the moment. Or, well, had at hand. So I sketched it out during the idea phase, and I looked really at how I would portray the lighting for the day, as that was the more important part for the prompt. And I then kind of moved on until a bit later. Once I was done with the drawings of the day, able to move on and done with other work that I had to do, I could move the sketches first and very roughly draft it into a new file, where I would then be able to let the drawing develop into its own thing in a more undisturbed manner. By this I simply mean that I wouldn't be distracted by other ideas, with it being its own thing, and I could complete the drawing to the timeline that I needed to, whilst fitting it into other obligations as well. It does mean that the sketches usually saw a bit of a slow development, especially to fix the details from the very first draft, but I was able to complete the sketch by I'd say about day 7 of the month, where I then started the flat colours. Now, I know I have rambled a lot about the moment, but the sketch for itself was rather simple. I just needed the character and the portrait behind them, with the rest being up to interpretation, and early drafts as I'm still kind of developing exactly how their castle would look, and what they would have access to in this era, and a whole load of other things. That kind of just meant it was the early drafts. I didn't need to worry about accuracy and detail. However, this didn't really bother me at this stage too much, so I was really more concerned with getting the core details to keep it in the moment that I was thinking of before anything else. It is kind of why I haven't really mentioned much of the sketching itself, really. But looking more at the process like I normally try to do, I was able to do the flat colours during day 7 of the 30-day challenge, since it had been quite a day when all things are considered. That being said, it meant that I had to pick a colour palette for this drawing, with the added complication of the characters' designs themselves. Now, the main character, her name is Lyra, does have a more solid design in the works, and has since this image began. There are small things that I would like to change, minor ways to kind of hopefully make them a bit more unique that would stand out. But her design has a pretty confirmed palette for the most part. The portrait and the palette of her mother, that is entirely up for debate still. And even by doing this, I wasn't putting anything into stone just yet, as the personality and the story of her mother is still developing rather well. In terms of the drawings palette in the process though, this just meant that I had some point to start with, so I could kind of fit things around Lyra's palette and to kind of work from there. Lyra as a character is really mainly set with her hair and the eye colour, with a common accent of gold or yellow. However, there isn't anything really too set in stone with their dresses, other than favourite colours that I might keep listed somewhere, or kingdom colours that she would commonly wear to represent where she's from. Now, out of these, her sort of main colour that I draw her with is blue, which, if plans serve me well, is what she's wearing at the moment. She, like most regular people, would have favourite outfits and dresses, but also be a bit more confined in their wardrobe compared to today, given the era that she exists within. I mean, yes, she is noble, so she would have more than the average person at this time, but it wouldn't be enough to draw like a new dress each day or something. So this blue dress is kind of her main one, and then she does have variants of styles that are also made in a blue palette and other colours as well. Some of these other colours may be green, or other ones that they'd have easy access to, but blue by far is her main one. So that was then the starting point, and how I came to use the blue dress that I really like for her. It also kind of wrapped up Lyra's part of the palette and the issues at hand. Around that, I though was able to pair it with rather simple neutral colours for the rest of the palette, and mainly keep it neutral with the wall, and a darker brown on the details and things like the trim around the floor and everything, to kind of almost resemble wood. But I then had the main part of the drawing that I wasn't sure about, and I kinda had to work it out for the rest of this to go anywhere. The mother in the portrait has no design, as I have already said, and that's not really changed between when I drew this and now. This is all kind of especially true with when I drew this character, because she was very at a much earlier point of development compared to now. I think now I would have a better chance of making her design, and it is in my list of things to do, but she most certainly did not have one at the time of drawing this. A part of the story has always been planned, yes, but she wasn't really the most relevant to it until I started to expand on who she was, and kind of what she's been through before. Her motivations, that I've only recently worked out, are really what's brought her more to life. And even then, it's something that I plan to do via her own set of stories to properly tell the parts that I need to. But this all means that I was sort of making up the first draft of the design at the moment, and it is more of a recent thing that I've been working on the finer points to it. Now, I did, however, want the woman to look a lot like Lyra, if not mostly the same. I made their hair a few shades different to her base colour, and I think that her mother would be more of a red character than blue, but I did keep it fairly simple just for the moment. To be fair, I've since changed the design in my head, since I feel like the drawing here makes it a bit unclear that the painting is someone else, and it is definitely something that I'll be taking into consideration more when I do get around to designing them. I think that just in the moment, I was semi-aware of this, but I also didn't hate how it made the image read. If the painting is Lyra as well, then it would be a different narrative, but not one that I would necessarily hate, and it also wouldn't change things too much. It would just be not what I had originally planned. In saying that, there are maybe a few things that I would have gone back to change, if I allowed myself to do that. Between now and then, her mother has gained a few more visual differences, and it's only in part of writing this script and recording it now that I am looking back at the drawing for how these areas turned out and things that I can comment on. And I'm realising that I forgot one of Lyra's main accessories, but it's a bit of a month late to change, so I'll kind of just have to grin and bear it. In other words, Lyra normally has glasses, and she doesn't have glasses in the drawing. It is one of the things that I very commonly forget in her design, so I'm just going to overlook it, and that's going to be that. But even in saying that, it would kind of be a weaker link to just have the differences between the painting and Lyra be, oh, one has glasses and one doesn't. Even in saying that, it would still read very much the same, just as if she was painted without her glasses for whatever reason for that portrait. Anyway though, I'm kind of almost straying into the detail part of this script, so let's get a little bit back on track. The point here is that I went a bit with a safer option in the palette by having the pair look very alike. In the story and the characters, it makes sense since Lyra does try a lot to emulate her parents, and her mother is one in particular. But it doesn't need to be to this degree looking back. It did, however, mean that for the moment the palette was sorted and the flat colours were done. Now this is where I turn to look more at the shading and the lighting in the process. But like normal here, and since we are already straying into the region, I'd rather use the time left to talk about the details of the work, which I have already been doing. Granted, this has normally been in the form of a tangent, but hey ho. I don't mind the tangents too much, as it normally just means that I'd rather talk about that anyway, rather than whatever's going on, so I hope you don't mind them either. But I should try to stay a little bit more on track here. So the first detail that I want to discuss then is actually Lyra herself, the girl in the foreground. I know, I've spoken almost entirely about her so far, so what could I really say that I haven't already? Well, I've spoken about her colour palette and her role in the story to a degree. I would even argue that I haven't explained that in much detail or much depth either, just touched on the surface. But I actually want to touch on the details included in her design this time, and kind of why I did that. The first detail that I want to touch on here is her facial expression. It actually is something that I do change at some point in the drawing, since the original simply didn't tell the story that I wanted it to, or it was at least for a later moment of the conversation. Maybe even the end of the conversation when everything was kind of decided. But I started off with her smiling, maybe trying to make it seem like she was still speaking, but it just didn't look right the longer I stuck with it. The story it was telling just didn't match up with what I wanted it to be, and it felt more like she was nervous with the rest of the pose, or, at the worst, the expression didn't match the rest of the pose at all. I wanted it to be a bit clearer that this is maybe something of a serious scene, of a moment not to be taken too lightly. It matters, and the awkward smile simply didn't match, so I altered the facial expression slightly to hopefully fix what I wasn't happy with. I mean, I could have likely pushed this area a bit more, but I was doing it later in the process, so I kind of just did what made me happy for the moment, rather than what would have added another day to the drawing. Anyway though, there are other details to her that I want to discuss as well, whilst I try really hard to ignore the fact that I didn't include her glasses the entire time. I'm only mentioning it because it absolutely does not bother me whatsoever, and I absolutely cannot go back and change it. I kind of have a bit of a self-imposed rule that if something is over a certain age of completion, like a week or a month, I then don't go back and fix it, even if I really want to. Because otherwise I could just see myself getting caught in a cycle of, oh, I'll just fix this and I'll just change that, which would be a never-ending cycle and I'd never make anything new. But anyway, I should just really overlook that fact, as I want to touch on the dress, since it is another case where it kind of shows that this world isn't that developed as of yet. Well, it at least wasn't when I made it. I have made a bit of progress since between now and then, but obviously I'm talking about when I made it a month ago. You see, this world has been in the works for most of this year and part of last year, whilst I have been working out areas from the most detailed and tiny areas that don't matter in the long run, to the wider and more basic fundamentals of the world. Part of this does include where Lyra lives and the kingdom that she sort of exists within, and the time of its history that surrounds her, and her role in all of it. It means working out the visuals of this area and the fashion and how that reflects the culture or the people, and kind of how everything ties in together, and also with working out what role she has in it, like where she stands in the social hierarchy, what she does, and also what her personal tastes would be during this era. In other words, The dress was something simple that I liked for the time being, even if in the long run it ends out as a bit of a placeholder. That is probably the most changing part of Lyra's design though, as the dress can change quite a bit. In a bit of a more detailed explanation, I do know that this character is a noble. She is, to not give too many details away, amongst the kingdom's higher ranks, and she is able to afford luxury that others may not. But despite this, for the moment that I prefer drawing the simpler dresses until I can work out how this region and era may accent these sorts of things, the simpler one also fits and also makes sense. She does exist at the tail end of a transition in the kingdom, so it's also kind of working out how two developing ideas would then come to merge and overlap, to kind of reach what I have established for the eras that shortly follow after her. I also kept the dress simpler for the drawing, since the drawing itself isn't the most detailed, and I didn't want her to stand out too much against it all. If I had added all the lace and the frills that, yes, her dresses may realistically include, it would have been a bit strange to look at given how the rest of the scene is. But whilst I am justifying this, I also just simply like it better this way for the time being. I mean, I'll let you in on a short secret here. Between finishing the sketch and the start of the video, and the flat colours and everything, I did trial some details like lace and ruffles, and it just didn't suit what I know of the character. She is noble, but the kingdom at this time is going through significant change, and it's still seeing the effects of it. It is a good change, don't get me wrong, it's one that strengthens it in the long run to let it survive. But it is still a time where simple dresses on a daily basis would kind of make a little bit more sense for her. The patterns and such are for public appearances, and I am still deciding if this takes place after a public show or not, so that does come into play. But I kind of just kept it simple for now, and in her favourite colour, since it made more sense for the drawing, and it also meant that I couldn't get caught up in the world details, if that makes sense. Otherwise I think I would have spent most of the month world building and not drawing. Now, I know I rambled about that, but it actually leads me then into the next detail, since the dress ties into the portrait behind her. The portrait was made when the mother was younger, some decent time before all of this happened and took place. There were then hints in the drawing of how the fashions may be slowly shifting, and I did do this a little bit on purpose. Now, it isn't anything major or significant, but the neckline for the portrait is more of a square, with a significant detail put into the lining of this area. By this I mean that there is a more notable lining present more than anything kind of like the trim down the front of Lyra's dress. There's an accent colour and it's a bit more, drawing more attention to the box, I should say. However, with Lyra, there isn't that box shape and it's more of a curve to the neck. But it is also an echo of the square in the fact that it comes straight down and then into the curved bit. I really don't know how to explain it otherwise. I should probably start learning a bit more fashion terms if I'm going to be explaining this, but this is the best I can do for now. Another detail here though is that Lyra has a necklace more tightly around the neck in the style of a choker, with details then hanging off of that. I know it isn't the most obvious here, but her mother's portrait is then more of a classic gold necklace. My favourite echo here though is that her mother has a veil on the back of her hair. I'm not sure if that is the right way to describe it as, but it's meant to look as if there's some fabric pinned into the underside of the bun in her hair, whilst all of the hair is then tied back. Lyra, by contrast, only ties up part of her hair, with the rest of it remaining loose. I did add this detail again since Lyra does try to mirror her mother, but they are their own people from different eras, and I also thought it was a little fun touch to show the differences slightly shifting across time. I think when I'm redoing the designs I will try to look more at this, since I would be looking at them together rather than in isolation like I have been for the moment, but that's all to come and all stuff for the future. Speaking of the portrait though, I do acknowledge that most of these details and shifts are obscured by how I placed Lyra in the image. I was very aware when drawing this that I was adding details and drawing things that would simply not be seen. But it was for the best, and it was kind of the better outcome that I covered them up rather than trying to keep everything visible. The placement was the strongest with Lyra in front of the frame, and I kind of had to work with that. I could have made her smaller, or put her to the side, or done something else so that she wasn't obscuring the picture of her mother as much. But it just simply made absolutely no sense whatsoever when she is the main focus. You see her first and then the painting behind her, and all of my choices for this work was decided upon by this hierarchy. It's why, despite the lighting that I could have worked with, I made sure that the painting itself was in complete shade. And this does tie into the final details here that we are getting into before we run out of time. But the lighting was the element that kept it tied to the beginning, and the prompt that started all of this. It started from the prompt of dusk, so it had to look like it, and I wanted to do it with a strong beam of light pouring from the side of the image, with shadows then being everywhere else. Doing this did mean that the arch of the painting would cast its own shade as well, so I added an extra layer of that between Lyra and the background in the arch, which also kind of helped everything fall into place visually, and to kind of finish off and establish the hierarchy that I was aiming for. But I will turn a bit of attention to the light here, as it is something I kind of basically was waiting to do for the entire drawing process, and I did make some personal choices for it, rather than going what would make more sense. At the core of the process, it is simply using light and multiply layers to kind of adjust the colours behind it all until the ray of light is correct and the focal point. Doing it this way is hardly anything new, but it is a really effective way of portraying time with drawings and to kind of give everything a final overall look. I instead actually want to talk about the shadow cast, since, well, looking back at it, there isn't much sense to it, and I do remember I made the choice quite selfishly. Now, it makes more sense for the light to be coming from in front of Lyra and behind the camera. In the hallway layout, they would either be in the shade between windows, or stood with the window behind the camera. But there is magic in the world, and Lyra's main manipulation is light itself. Magic in the world responds a fair bit to emotions and suggestions, with a lot of other complexities and different kind of requirements to all of it, especially for this sort of accidental or passive use. But I kind of sort of let the light slide, since there were some reasons that I could think of that would result in this in the long run. The first is that they may be at a corner of a hallway, and the light is from a window to the side. It may be one without complex frames and only partially hit by the sun, hence the cast being this very sharp ray. That also does kind of make a bit of sense with the location and the layout that I have in mind, but again, that's all up to change. The excessive shade present could then be caused by passive casting, by who she's speaking to, as that character often has a sort of connection to their element, and is also quite prone to this passive sort of use. The other one is that Lyra here kind of rarely has this passive use and this passive influence, so it would kind of add to the scene and the emotion of it if she does end up doing it without realising, when it isn't something for her to commonly encounter. I mean, she's seen using her magic here, so it could also be part that she's doing it intentionally. Will most people get this? No, probably not. It is something that needs explaining, but the drawing has always been for myself, and time here has certainly snuck upon us for me to properly explain it. But this drawing is one that I really, really like, because it was something that I did entirely for me, and it is purely self-indulgent. I can excuse that the lighting is off because I like it this way, and I know the story. I can explain the outfits and bits that I'm not sure of, as it's a draft, and a version that I only wanted to share here because I found the entire process fun. That is then what all of this is about. Yes, don't get me wrong, I will continue to seek improvement and keep to enjoying that development. But I also like these drawings every now and then that are done entirely for me, that I can kind of understand as I want to do them, and I don't intend to do much with them other than maybe sharing them here because I can. By this I don't mean I plan to make them prints or to do something with them, because they're for me. Now, with that being said, it is for me, but I do hope that you enjoyed this as well, and understood at least fragments of the explanations given. I am also interested to see how people read it without the context of the world behind it, or the events that kind of go into it, since no one could possibly know all of what ties into it, only what I have told you here. But do tell me what you think below. That, though, is all that I have for this week, and I am glad you decided to join me. Have a nice day, and have an even better week. But for now, goodbye.